and welcome. You are here. You have made it. You are listening to Tuesday Cafe. My name is Meghan Bowman. I'm actually here in for Sean Canan. He's on vacation. He will be back next week. And I'm joined today by Chris Young, our senior reporter.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for listening.
Yes, good morning. And today we are talking to some of our presidential and vice presidential candidates. We are going to hear from Lauren Onak, the running mate for Peter Sonski, and Mike Dermott, the running mate for Chase Oliver. We'll also hear from presidential candidates Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai and Jill Stein. Now, I do want to let you know we reached out to every campaign to join us today, and either they were unavailable or just did not respond. Now, we'll also have our phone lines and our emails and all of that open, so if you want to reach out, we would love to hear from you, and if we have time, we will definitely try and get in your questions. You can text them at 813-433-0885. You can call 813-239-9663 or email dj@WMNF.org.
And again, live with us today is Lauren Onak, a native Floridian who is joining us today while Peter is traveling for the campaign trail. And she's representing the American Solidarity Party. Mike Dermott is the VP pick for the Libertarian Party, speaking to us about his and Chase Oliver's campaign. And presidential candidates joining us are Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai running as an independent. We'll hear a pre-recorded interview later in the show that Meghan had with the Green Party's candidate, Dr. Jill Stein, earlier this month. And welcome, candidates.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
It's so great to have you on with us today. Thanks so much for joining us. Everybody, so fresh. Looks like we all had our coffee this morning.
Yeah, everybody's ready and excited at 10 a.m.
So, I think we were kind of planning on doing a sort of round robin today. Would you guys be okay with that?
Yes.
Excellent. Great. So let's just start, quickly how you guys got into politics. Mike, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about your history.
Sure. I've been with the Libertarian Party for a dozen years. A long time before that, I was actually a Republican. A lot of people who are independent or participating in non-major parties have been with the major parties in the past and have been disillusioned. I'm fiscally conservative. And so as a young economist, as a young professional economist, I used to work for the White House for a couple of years and other federal agencies. I really thought the Republican Party could represent my interests, and I found out the hard way that that was not the case. And so I really have felt like the Republican Party left me more than the idea that I left it. And, I certainly believe that Americans should have the right to make decisions for themselves, not just in financial matters, but in all matters, how you live your life, how you pursue your dreams, whether you want to be vaccinated or not, how you raise your kids, what kind of schools you want to send your children to, what kind of foreign policy you want your government to represent you with. These are all things that I think fall into a bucket that have led Americans to be disappointed by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, which is why the Libertarian Party exists, to talk about the fact that the government needs to do a better job of standing up for our civil liberties. Yes, even in terms of protecting us from the government, but also in making sure that our government adheres to a set of policies that better reflects our values as Americans. I think a lot of Americans are frustrated, not just because we have too much government, which is true, but the fact that our government behaves in ways that do not align with our ethics and with our values. And so as libertarians, we spend a lot of time talking about lowering taxes and shrinking government, giving you an opportunity to live your life the way that you want. And we also spend a lot of time criticizing our foreign policy, which I firmly believe does not represent the way Americans would make these decisions if we were left to our own ethics and values.
Perfect. And Lauren, so tell me a little bit about you and also a little bit about the American Solidarity Party.
Sure. So the American Solidarity Party was founded in 2012 by really a grassroots movement of Christians who felt like they were no longer represented by the American left or right, by either major party. And we ran our first presidential candidates in 2016 and then again in 2020. So this is our third time running a presidential candidate, Peter Sonski, this year. And I came to know the party because I grew up in a very liberal household, went to college, sort of found my faith again, and got involved in pro-life work. And at the time, sort of started voting Republican for that issue, but found that more and more conflict between what they were offering in terms of other social justice issues and what I felt was right for our country. So I joined the American Solidarity Party, and maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, and we really are here to represent Christians and people of faith and people of goodwill who feel that they're not represented well by the current two-party system, who feel like gospel values have been sort of pitted against one another. Vulnerable groups of people have been pitted against one another by our current political system. So we come from a tradition of Christian democratic parties that exist in Europe and South America. And it's a little hard to fit us into the typical American political box, but we tend to describe ourselves as socially conservative, economically progressive, and that's an easy way to sort of explain the party's history and who we are.
Thank you.
And Dr. Ayadore, same question. Could you tell me a little bit about the party you're running for and why you decided to run?
You're muted. Sorry. Gotta love Zoom.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Shiva Ayadure.
Good morning.
I'm in Massachusetts. So first of all, we have a global movement called Truth, Freedom, Health. That's a global movement. About 500,000 people, about 1 billion people know about it globally. But this movement emerged in 2020 when, as a scientist, as an engineer, as an inventor, I was the first one to come out against the lockdowns. And you can go look at it on Twitter. All the other candidates were supporting lockdowns, including some of the candidates, that you've interviewed before. But the lockdowns are a very, very important point in American history because it really separated the wheat from the chaff. Of those people really understood the mechanics of how government worked, the nature of how science had been taken over by moneyed interests. So that was a very, very important point, and people can go look at that history. But my journey to that point goes back to India. I'm the only candidate who's running on this question of what does it mean to be a citizen. I was not born in the United States. I was born in India. Now, the text of the Constitution says that only natural born people can become president. However, we have to go back to the roots of what it means to be an American citizen. So when we launched our campaign, we wanted to go to the roots of what it means to be an American citizen, but more importantly and profoundly, the 14th and the 19th Amendment, which abrogated the natural born provision in the Constitution. But the journey that I want to talk about comes back to India. You see, I grew up in India, where India has a caste system. Some of you may be aware of that. Most Indians in the United States are Brahmins, including Kamala Harris, right? She has no idea of the immigrant journey in a very fundamental way. I grew up in a world in India where if you went to a Brahmin's home, they threw you out and they said you can go anywhere else, they'd spit on you. And I was treated like that. So I understand at a very visceral level what second-class citizenship means. So when my parents came here in 1970 to the United States, I knew the great opportunities that America afforded. So I worked my butt off. By the time I was 14, I invented the first email system, went to MIT, got a bunch of degrees. But within me was this deep concern about what citizenship meant. And were there two classes of citizens in America? And that's what has emerged. You have these two big political parties and also even the minor fake independent candidates who talk a good game as though they're for everyone, but they're actually part of the machine. Bernie Sanders, Jill Stein included, et cetera. And we can discuss more of that. But there is no voice anymore for the large mass of American people. So we actually have two classes of citizens or more in the United States. So when we launched our campaign in 2023, April, we talked about what does it mean to be a citizen anymore? Clearly, the founders of the United States, when they framed the Constitution, if you really delve into it, they were about loyalty and commitment to the United States. Some people may not know you don't have to be even born on U.S. soil to be natural born. You can go adopt 100 kids overseas and they are overnight natural born citizens, believe it or not. So the whole notion of citizenship is what is at the forefront. The
But
14th
isn't that, sorry to jump in, but isn't that a core tenet? I mean, that's written into the Constitution that you have to be a citizen of the United States.
Let's talk about that. It also was written only he can be president. So what's happened is people don't study civics anymore. The 19th Amendment allowed women to run. The 14th Amendment has the Equal Protection Clause, which says we are all equal. Are you equal or are you sort of equal? You see? So no one wants to delve into these questions, and the Supreme Court has never ruled on what does it mean to be natural born. But there have been multiple Supreme Court cases which have said that you cannot distinguish between a natural born citizen and a naturalized citizen, period.
Okay. All right.
Roger Calero, just one point. Roger Calero in New Jersey was allowed to run twice for president of the United States and was not removed. In fact, he was on 25 states. So this comes down to qualifications to be president versus running for president. This was what Trump versus Anderson was about. Unequivocally, the court came out and said that anyone can run for the president, be elected, and only Congress holds the authority to determine the qualifications of president. So it's a very, very important issue. And it comes back to the First Amendment. For example, anyone here can be 25 years old and run for president. So it's running versus being qualified to hold the office. But the natural born provision must be extricated. It is absolutely second-class citizens. It's vile and it's anti-American.
Thank you for your response. I appreciate it. I do want to jump into some of the issues that are most pressing, I think, for a lot of people who are going to vote this election season. There has been a lot of political violence and now 2 attempted assassinations of the former president, Donald Trump. There's gun violence in schools. We're in Tampa, so here in the Tampa region, schools are seeing an overwhelming amount of threats to our students. Actually, just this morning, I received a text message from my kids' district that they're investigating an online threat. It leaves me scared and frankly feeling powerless to protect my kids. So my question to you is this: gun violence in America, it's a problem. So if you're elected, what are you going to do to fix it? Mike, let's start with you. You're muted.
Sure. I'm sorry about what your family is going through today and what families all over America are going through with regard to their kids in schools. There are a number of things that we can do, and I believe that we really should do to keep our schools, to keep our kids safer. And these things are not cheap, right? I'm not suggesting that there's any cheap, completely easy, certainly no free solution. But we need to have armed personnel at these schools, resource officers, some states call them, police officers, one way or another. A lot of school districts believe that maybe some of the teachers need to be armed. I think that we need to embrace that conversation. I don't think that should be willy-nilly, but there are things that we can do to make that situation safer. People have talked about metal detectors. This is not a cheap solution, but I think it is a logical solution. I think it's an excellent step in the right direction. I think that our schools need to be better assembled in terms of lockdown security capabilities. It's just far too easy for bad people to gain access. That has to be repaired. That's not cheap. Having, doors that automatically lock, multiple entryways in these schools need to be secured. None of this is cheap, but we do have to undertake it. And as we've learned over not only the past few years, but even the past couple of days, even if you have laws that prevent certain people from getting guns, they get them anyway, which is, frustrating at least. But I think that what that means is that we need to focus on hardening the targets that we so much want to protect. There are other things that we can do in terms of creating greater school choice, which I'm a big believer in just for the sake of better academic outcomes. But I think that greater school choice would give greater flexibility in terms of pursuing different types of solutions so we can more rapidly discover what works.
Excellent. Shiva, can we hear what you would do to fix, this gun violence issue that is just overtaking?
Yeah, it's a great question. The problem is let me tell you what the problem is, then we can talk to the solution. There's the political parties, major and minor, always come up with these very quick fix solutions. Some of you, what you just heard. The reality is no one wants to go down to the root cause of gun violence because that's a systems issue. And when you go down to that, some of the work of Professor Newman is one of the only woman who did a very deep analysis of the systems issue. She looked at the 5 issues that cause gun violence. And it turns out if one of those issues is turned on, you have a mass shooting. But underlying all of those, what she found was income inequality, believe it or not. That many of the kids who were involved in this were involved in a situation where they had deep issues, or they were part of a situation where they could see the differences in income inequality. And this is not wanting to be addressed. So we always want to come up with layers of security. Yeah, you need to do that because you never want to solve the real issue. You're putting Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids. But the reality is that at the heart of this, what Newman's work showed was it's a systems issue. It's a multifaceted issue. And if you take one of them away, you can solve it. So for example, a kid is bullied. The teachers look the other way. That could have solved a number of gun violence issues. And it goes on if you remove any one of these 5 issues. But what happens is politicians just watch and then they say some standard line, oh, we're going to put security, we're going to put cameras, we're going to do this, and then they go on. The issue is, does America want to go solve the fundamental issues? And those fundamental issues require the need to recognize that since 1970 till today, $47 trillion in wealth has been moved from the 2 bottom income sectors upward. That's what's happened. And people, do you think, are just going to sit aside and not develop certain kinds of anger and get pissed off? And there's been a lot of research done on this. So do we want to address this fundamental issue of 0.0001% of people subjugating the other set of people? And those do lead to systemic issues. But if you don't want to address that, we're going to create a layered Band-Aid of solutions. But yes, you can go solve gun violence in the immediate level by quote unquote arming teachers, putting in all these things. But that's never going to solve the systemic issue, because or you could eliminate guns. And then you get into knives. You can go into Asia and so on. There's mass knivings, believe it or not. So the issue is, what is the source of this violence where people believe they need to go do that? And you'll find out it has to do with income inequality. And we can go into a large analysis where you take the Gini score on one axis, which is income inequality, and you look at gun violence, and you'll see a direct correlation. The greater increase in income inequality, the greater amount of gun violence.
I think there's also a comparison to, mental health and that, and making sure that that is protected as well. Lauren, what about you? If you were elected, what would you do?
Sure. Well, the American Solidarity Party supports, first of all, strengthening some of the systems that we have in place that are not functioning well. The National Instant Criminal Background Check System needs to be fully funded and expanded so that it can actually process all of the background check requests that are coming in, and state and federal agencies need to be held accountable to report all of that information in a timely manner. And we also support standardizing criminal definitions across federal and state agencies to prevent misreporting information to the NICS. We would call for states to offer free classes in safe firearm handling and storage, and to make those classes widely available to residents. And I think, in addition, when we talk about gun violence and political violence, I think we can't talk about those things without recognizing the dehumanizing rhetoric that we've seen, not just in this campaign, but in American political discourse. You saw it in the debate. The way we talk about each other, the way we are civilized or not in our political discussions makes a difference. If we're constantly demonizing the other side, we are pushing people towards violence. And so I think in addition to all these things, we want to see people taking accountability for the words that they use, the things that they say about their political opponents, and to keep in mind the dignity of every human person, the dignity of every human life. Once we start to forget that, there is an escalation of violence.
Yeah, that reminds me of something a colleague said to me once, that the pen is mightier than the sword. So
Yes.
always something to think about, right?
Always something to think about. And I think that there's kind of just having you guys here. There's a huge controversy of whether you should be running in the first place. Thank you to Nancy in St. Pete. We got a message that said, this is not the year for unknown candidates to run. The two-party system isn't perfect, as we all know, but it's here for the foreseeable future. What would you say to the folks that are saying voting outside the main parties is throwing your vote away? Lauren, can we start with you?
Sure. I love this question. I get it every single time that I'm interviewed. And I really think that change has to start somewhere. All of us here are representing third parties and independent candidates because we do not feel represented by the two-party system. And they've been telling us for years that this is the most important election of all time. I've been hearing that over and over and over again. Ultimately, people shouldn't be voting because they're afraid of the other side. That's not the reason to choose a president. I get this question of, what if you're helping the greater evil instead of the lesser evil win? Is it even clear to us anymore who that would be? It's not to me, to be very honest. I'm seeing both sides putting aside huge chunks of the population, dialing down protection for the most vulnerable people in this country. And I'm not sure where this idea is so totally fear motivated. And I think a candidate should be earning your vote because you respect them, not because you feel you owe it to them or because you think the other person might be worse. So no, I think if we stop doing what we're doing, it's to the detriment of the country, and we're not dropping out. We're not going anywhere.
All right, and Dr. Shiva, I'll throw it to you. You're muted.
The history of U.S. political discourse has always come from, quote unquote, from the outside in. If you really go look at it historically, given the time, many scholars have written about this. But the reality is this. I'll give you a state by Massachusetts. In the last 5 years, 94% of people under the age of 24 are now independent, registered as independents. 75% of people under the age of 50 are now unaffiliated. In Massachusetts alone, in a general election, typically 2.7 million people vote. There's 2 million people registered to vote who don't even bother voting. And there's another 1 million people who don't even bother to vote. So I call all of that dark matter, which means people who don't even participate in the political process. Why? Because look at the choices that they have. One Zionist versus another Zionist, right? And people recognize that regardless of what's happened over the last 50 years, their incomes have gone down, cost of living has gone up, and lifespans have gone down. So everyday people are actually quite smart. They don't want to participate in this nonsense. So when people like myself come out and we point these things out, that cost of living has consistently gone up since 1970 and lifespan has gone downwards, people wake up to that and they want fresh new blood. When I ran for Senate in Massachusetts, 60% of the people who came out were people who never voted. So we are bringing out what I call, quote unquote, dark matter in the universe, people who want to participate. But the discourse is always bounded by the mainstream media into topics that are very, very, frankly, of not major concern to most people. So the larger discourses are not brought out, like our campaign brings out. Why is lifespan going down? Ours is the only candidacy that's put that in front and center. And these are issues that will only be brought out by working people who are outside in, not by the main political parties. The main political parties are owned.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Shiva. And Mike?
Thank you. I think that Lauren really touched on something important, the extent to which Americans are voting against something, right, out of fear. And this is something that we see as a natural outgrowth when you see political parties, particularly in systems where there's only 2 political parties, and everything gets split all the way down to the media, right? In my lifetime, we have seen online media and starting with cable news, right, going back to the 80s, split right down the middle. It's very difficult to find news outlets that represent, an interest in telling you about both parties. And so everyone has moved to the polar opposites, criticizing the other side in a way that would be considered would have been considered impossible a couple of generations ago. Lauren's exactly right with the language of dehumanizing the other side, degrading the other side. This has not served us well. What it leads to is each party has given up on what used to be its political agenda. In my case, growing up as a Republican, fiscal conservatism, my family are mostly Democrats, joined that party believing it would represent, in some sense, a social liberalism. Both of those have gone by the wayside. Now, the Democratic Party's number one priority is keeping Republicans out of power, and vice versa for the Republican Party. Neither one pursues an agenda that it used to. This is where authoritarianism grows, out of the idea that a political party could leverage fear by suggesting what you really have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties or even the loss of your resources or the loss of your income. What you really should fear is that other idiot coming to power, and I'm here to protect you. That's what the two-party system has come down to. And so we need to stand up for a couple of different things. One is, Lauren's exactly right. We need to vote for something instead of against something. If you're not voting for your ethics and for your values, I think that's really a sign of wasting your vote. And we need to vote against the two-party system itself. You need to send a signal that the system we have now is unacceptable. We need to vote for the change that you want. If you vote for one of the existing major parties, you're sending the signal that you think that the system is on track. And I don't think most people agree with that.
All right. Thanks,
and
Mike.
I appreciate all of y'all's answers. I guess it still leaves me, when I talked to Dr. Jill Stein, this was something I brought up to her was, historically, that party's only ever received 1% of the vote after everything is said and done. Taking those votes, it's like, yes, the two-party system, like Chris said, is not the most perfect system in the world, but, chances are that's what we're going to end up with. And so I don't know, I don't know. I guess it remains to be seen if we will see it make the change. I guess you have to start something.
Somewhere. Yep.
Right. It has to start somewhere. So there was something Shiva brought up, actually, the cost of living, and all of you kind of touched on it a little bit. Really what people are worried about. Like, you're voting for the things that you care most about, right? I know a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck. This is something I think that a majority of Americans are struggling with, how they're going to make their bills in the next month, how they're going to put food on the table, So really, there are all these huge issues, but when it comes down to it, we're worried about that day-to-day life, how we're going to survive. So, if you guys were to come into office, what are those paychecks for people going to look like? Because it seems like there's a lot of plans you have, but where's the money from that going to come from? Mike, do you want to take it?
Sure. First of all, we are the party that stands against the idea that the federal government should be spending all of your money and borrowing more money and creating new programs. We believe that our economy would grow better, and I think that economic data bears this out, both over time and across nations. The economy grows best when the government plays as little role as absolutely possible. So we stand against the idea of the government taxing you to death, taking all your money, spending it for you, spending it on silly programs, rather keeping it in your pocket. We believe that requires not only lowering taxes, but perhaps even more importantly, stopping the government from spending so much money, which is where the pressure comes from to tax you and to create inflation. So we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that the government needs to stop spending money in order to fight inflation. We also, as a professional economist myself, I spend a lot of time talking about the fact that we need to fundamentally change the way that we manage our money at the federal level in this country. The Federal Reserve System is set up in a very unfortunate way I think most of your viewers and listeners would be absolutely shocked to learn that the way the most important price in the world is set, the interest rates on the US dollar, are set by quite literally locking up a dozen people in a room every 6 weeks and asking basically what mood they're in regarding the economy. That's going on today and tomorrow, coincidentally. I think most Americans would be shocked and would say, that sounds like a silly system. Well, as it turns out, it is. It's a crummy system that doesn't work very well, that leads to too much inflation, and it needs to be adjusted. It needs to be changed.
Thanks. Lauren, how about you?
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that one thing that our party strives to represent, cares a lot about, is helping families who are in need live comfortable lives. One of the most radical things in our platform, I think, is calling for the resources to make a single income livable for every family, to stop this reliance on this double income, which is leaving working parents coming up short and really split between many things. As someone who grew up and I graduated college during the recession, I know what it's like to sort of be stuck in a sort of a job market where you're never quite making what you need to get by. One thing that we talk about a lot in ASP is the need to invest in American families as the foundation of our society. So the economy exists for people and not the other way around. We support expanded child tax credits. We support school choice. We support greater employee ownership of organizations. And so we really want to bring the focus back to the dignity of the laborer rather than, focusing on them as more cogs in the wheel, driving forward GDP and things like that.
Excellent. And, Dr. Shiva, what would you do to lower those paychecks?
Increase the value of those paychecks, the salaries. But let me take 2 points. One point has to do related to cost of living. So one point, and they're interconnected, so people to recognize that economic policy is directly related to foreign policy, at least in the United States. So the reason that you have that curve of cost of living going up and up and up is because the value of money is being reduced. Why does the value of money being reduced? Well, someone is printing money and printing money all day. People like the proponents of modern monetary theory say that you can keep printing money as much as you want. Why? Because the United States is a reserve currency. Well, how does the United States maintain its reserve currency status? Well, behind the US dollar is no longer gold or no longer oil. It is war. It is countries like Israel who stand as an aircraft carrier in the Middle East. So US reserve currency status is maintained by US being US imperialists, the elite being US imperialists. So this needs to be directly connected. And this comes down to the issue of Zionism. This is why 90% of the people in Congress are funded by Zionism. So if we want to end that cost of living curve, you got to end all funding to Israel and stop foreign wars. Libertarian Party talks a good game about, decentralization, but they're all Zionists. So we need to understand that Zionism and starting foreign wars is directly related to the printing of money. And if you keep printing money, that cost of living curve is going to go up and up and up. And that's one part. The other part that's concomitantly related to this is, how did Americans reduce cost of living? How did wages go up? One thing that took place between 1900 and 1970 was massive labor movements, bottoms-up movements. In 1886, 4 American workers were shot for fighting for the 8-hour workday. Those movements were crushed by left and right, and including fake independent candidates. So between 1970 till today, there's only been about 900 strikes and about 2 million people participating in them. Prior to that, there was close to 250 million people participating in 11,000 strikes. So all the so-called anti-establishment fake independent candidates have crushed bottoms-up movements. We need to rebuild bottoms-up movements where people recognize that the only way that they're going to reduce cost of living is going to come through the American working class rising up and building these independent movements of both parties and not relying on any of these fake independent candidates who support Zionism. So you cannot divorce foreign policy from economic policy. As long as the United States is funding Israel, as long as we have 90% of the Congress people and every presidential candidate except me keeps wanting to, do Israel all day, that curve cost of living is going to go up and up and up. And this is a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay. We actually have a caller who wants to make a comment on y'all's responses. This is Steve from Tampa. He wants to talk about the inflation and Fed Reserve. Hi, Steve.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
I can. Yes. Thanks so much.
Okay. Yeah, just real quick, I have a lot of friends. I'm not broke. I have a lot of friends who have more money than I do. And I can't tell you how many folks with $100,000 cars and homes over $1 million South Tampa that they bought for $300,000 or $150,000. They complain about the price of gas. And I think to myself, where's the reality check on this? So the Federal Reserve, 12 people in a room deciding interest rate based on how they feel. The Federal Reserve is independent, or at least nominally independent, for a reason. It has a dual mandate. One portion and half of it is maximum employment. The other is inflation. There's no magic equation or magic formula, and some of the points being discussed here go back to a pretty long-standing debate between Friedrich von Hayek and Mr. Keynes. But most economists think that's kind of settled in the 20s and the 30s in terms of heavy deficit, that sort of thing. But the other point of view.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you calling in today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that was one of our callers, and we appreciate that. Candidates, we have kind of pushed the time limit. I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I wish that we could keep our conversation going. In about 30 seconds or less, is there anything else you want to say before we let you go?
Thanks for having us on. The Libertarian Party will be on the ballot in 47 states. Chase Oliver is our presidential nominee. If you believe in a foreign policy that does not blow your money around the world and foster these international wars, that believes that we should not be wasting money domestically also, if you believe in actually fighting inflation, then we're the party for you. A lot of people are disappointed by Democrats and Republicans. We get that. We are the party that is the third party, not just a third party. And I believe that voting for Libertarian Chase Oliver and for me will give you an opportunity to send the signal that you believe that our system needs to be disrupted.
Thank you. And how about you, Lauren, Dr. Shiva? Final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And if voters are looking for an option to promote policies that promote the dignity of human life from womb to tomb, please consider voting for Peter Sonsky and myself. And you can learn more at petersonsky.com. We're also urging Florida voters to vote no on Amendment 4 and to continue to protect unborn life. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Dr. Shiva, final thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, thanks very much for having this forum where the other media companies have not. If you go back to 1970 till today, cost of living has gone up exponentially and lifespan is going down. If you want a candidate who really wants to go address the systemic issues around that, then go to Shiva4president.com, because our goal is to go down to the systems issues and solve that problem. Independents, candidates, left wing, right wing, without that understanding, they're not going to solve anything. So if you really want to solve the problem of increasing lifespan, reducing cost of living, ours is the only movement, Truth, Freedom, Health, that can do that, because we're going down to the system level issues and solving that. And my history for the last 54 years shows that I can actually solve those problems and have contributed significantly to the United States in that. You can read all about it everywhere in spite of all the shadow banning. But if you are for reducing cost of living and increasing your child's lifespan, right now, if you have a child, your child is going to have a shorter lifespan than you. That's what all these parties have delivered. And it's time to change that. And Shiva for president is the only way to do that.
Thank you so much. Candidates, I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so much for coming to meet us.
Thanks a lot.
Of course.
Thank you.
Great work.
And now we're going to take some time. We're going to hear from Dr. Jill Stein. She is the Green Party's candidate. Her and I spoke a few weeks ago on Zoom as well. Now, Stein is not on all of the state's ballots, but she will be on Florida's. I started our conversation by asking her, kind of like the candidates we heard today, how she got into politics.
So I consider myself an anti-politician, I guess you could say. And I'm a medical doctor by training and by profession. You know, I saw that we have the best democracy money can buy, and it's virtually impossible to improve the conditions of our health without addressing the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system. So I basically moved from clinical medicine into political medicine. I was basically tricked into running for office back in the year 2002 and found that it was not at all what it was cut out to be, that there was a very promising and exciting conversation to be had that people were not getting from politics as usual, and that running with a people-powered party as opposed to a billionaire and corporate-powered party, that all kinds of things were possible. And it was a very exciting and promising conversation that has continued since then.
Historically, at least here in the U.S., the Green Party has tried to put candidates in more municipal and local positions to kind of introduce the party to the people. Is that still the case? And if not, what's changed?
Oh, very much. We remain very much a locally centered party, a grassroots, bottom-up party. So we've had approximately, well over 1,000 local office holders over the last couple decades. We currently have about 150 elected office holders, and that's everything from city councils to school committees to library boards and so on. So we've been very much locally focused, and really starting with the campaigns of Ralph Nader, we began to also take positions in the national elections as well, largely because there was very much a need for a people-powered choice in our elections, and that remains true to this day.
I'm glad you brought up Ralph Nader. So in 96, I'm pretty sure it was, I researched that he got just 1% of the vote nationally. How do you think it will fare this year?
Even while we have not won large numbers, we have very much won the day, and we have transformed the public agenda. You know, it's really true throughout our history that it has fallen to independent third parties to drive everything from the labor agenda to the environmental agenda and the women's rights agenda. So while we haven't won the highest office in the land, we have completely transformed the what people are talking about and what people demand. And so you can go back to the early 1900s, where it fell to the various socialist and labor parties to push forward the 40-hour week or Social Security or child labor laws. It really required voices outside of the sold-out political system in order to lift up the kinds of issues that the American people are really fighting for. And starting with Ralph Nader, he introduced the concept of Medicare for all. At the time, it was called single payer. This notion that Americans have a right to health care, and like all the other developed nations around the world, we can afford that, and we very much deserve to have that put on the table. So that notion of healthcare as a human right, in my first race in 2012, we launched the notion of free public higher education and a bailout for student debt. So, we've basically seen our ideas rise to prominence. Essentially, the entire progressive agenda right now has been launched by the Greens, then adopted by the Democrats, more in by way of lip service than actual realization. But it continues to push the envelope and be a focus for the American people. So you don't have to win the office in order to have a huge impact. In this race, we are the only anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker climate emergency campaign that's on the ballot across the country. And these ideas are absolutely essential and very much desired, needed urgently by the American people. So we're here, to transform the political debate as well as intentionally to win as much support at the national level as possible.
The two-party system is not perfect, right? But it is here for the foreseeable future. What would you say to those folks who say voting outside, the main parties of Democrat and Republican is like throwing your vote away?
I would answer it's throwing your vote away if you don't actually stand up for what it is that you need and what it is that you want. And let me just say that the answer to this corrupt, sold-out two-party system, and the American people don't need to be persuaded that this system is really toxic and has really thrown working people under the bus. Every year there's a poll done by Gallup, and it's at the highest level ever. It's like 63% of Americans now who are saying that the two major parties have done such a lousy job of serving the American people that we urgently need another independent major party. So it's not like people need to be convinced. The American people are really clamoring for that kind of change. That change exists right now with a simple electoral reform known as ranked choice voting, which the Democrats do everything in their power to take off of the agenda because they rely on extorting your vote. They don't sell themselves as being better than the Greens or having a better agenda. They basically just tried to silence their opposition and to smear and fear campaign against their opposition that Democrats are the lesser evil, so you have to vote for them. I would say to people, who think that they need, that their vote is owned by Democrats, that nobody owns your vote. Politicians have to earn your vote. And if you simply cave to this propaganda that someone else owns your vote, you completely lose your power in a democracy. And unless you have billions of dollars in your pockets, then you really rely on being able to stand up and be heard in an election. If you silence yourself by voting for the lesser evil, then there's no trace, there's no record that we demand health care as a human right for everyone, that we demand housing, at a time when 50% of Americans are paying to the teeth just to keep a roof over their heads. 30 to 50% of their monthly income right now is going just to pay the rent. And it's absolutely, untenable. We actually have an emergency in virtually every dimension of our lives right now, whether it's healthcare, housing, the quality of our schools, student debt, medical debt, the climate crisis, you name it. Meanwhile, our government is spending 50% and more of our congressional budget on the endless war machine, which is not making us safer and not making us more secure. So things are not being done in a way that benefits the American voter. And the American voter badly deserves, to have a real debate about this in our election. In the absence of a debate, when exactly are we going to fix this? When are we going to put real solutions on the table? and move them forward. So it's absolutely to our benefit as voters to stand up and make the demands for what it is that we need, because there's no politician coming in shining armor on a white horse that's going to save us. We have to stand up and be voices on our own behalf. That's just how a democracy works.
Voters have really attached themselves to the Green Party in mostly European countries. It doesn't seem as though it's had that kind of same acceptance here in the States, although it is growing and it's getting bigger. Why do you think European countries are seeing more support?
It's no secret that the American system is uniquely sold out, uniquely controlled by big money. We have really the most repressive two-party system, I think, world over. We're certainly spending money hand over fist. So our political system is bought and paid for. We have the best democracy money can buy, which is no democracy at all. It's been typically $1 billion in recent elections per presidential campaign. This time it's going to be much more. So there are, and the sellout of our political system goes hand in hand with the huge, unconscionable economic disparities in this that we have in this country, where 3 billionaires have as much money and resources as the lower 50% of the population. So in the U.S., we are struggling uniquely with crushing inequality. Over 60% of workers in this country are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay their rent. Some 18 million people in recent years. I think it was 2020, something like that. It might have been 2019, the last year for which there are records. That number of people were unable to afford their pharmaceuticals, and 8 million were driven into poverty by the costs of their health care. If you wind up getting cancer, the odds are at least 40% that you will basically spend down your life savings within 2 years. We have a very fiscally severe, austere environment in this country that, where if you were a billionaire, you were going to double or triple your wealth during COVID while everybody else gets pushed further down. So we have a system that is in meltdown in this country right now. To look at our crises of healthcare and housing and education and the climate. It's not getting fixed. Things are not getting better incrementally. They're actually getting worse in a rather terrifying way. So, it's just a question of time until the system breaks down. And is it going to break down because people are rioting in the street, or is it going to break down because we actually have a democratic debate and we actually allow the American people to consider their choices? Right now, the Democratic Party has been really the author of this so-called neoliberal agenda of austerity, of privatization, of endless war, large tax breaks for the wealthy. This is not going well. And American workers, are tired of being thrown under the bus, and we're seeing their allegiance switch now, where they used to vote regularly Democrat. Now in larger numbers, they're voting Republican. People very much are at the breaking point right now, are clamoring for other options. And once again, we see a fear campaign ginning up as we get closer to the election to try to rein people in, to rein voters in and try to keep them constrained and voting out of fear. This is not. And
that was the Jill Stein interview. You can catch that full interview on our website, WMNF.org. My name is Meghan Bowman. I'm here with Chris Young, our senior reporter. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today in Tuesday Cafe.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a great conversations that we had. And, Sean Kinane is not gone, but he will be back next week. So you don't have to worry about missing him.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. Like I said, you can go to WMNF.org if you want to see that full Jill Stein interview. Otherwise, we are around, and you can always reach out to me and Chris in the newsroom as well. Meghan at WMNF.org.
And Chris at WMNF.org.
Of course. Thanks for listening to WMNF Tampa. Up next is our NPR headlines.